Activate Your Introvert, the weekly show to help leaders build performance by understanding introversion. In this week's show, Introvert Myth of the Week. Introverts and extroverts don't get along. Leadership Tip of the Week, how to engage introverts in a team conversation. And a discussion with Tyler Foley. Tyler has been acting in film and television since he was 6 years old, and he's an accomplished film and stage performer, also the author of the #1 best-selling book, The Power to Speak Naked. But just before speaking to Tyler, after 79 episodes, this is the end. The end of Series 1. Next week, Series 2 of the show is starting. A similar structure, leadership tips, introvert myths, and an interview. And, by listeners' request, we have a new section, Question of the Week, where I'll answer one listener's question about introversion. What would you like to know? Place your question at activateyourintrovert.co.uk. You can join me on the show for it if you like, and by popular requests, the interviews will be slightly longer. Overall, the show will become 20 minutes long. Have you ever found it kind of tough to engage introverts in a team conversation? Chances are the issue is based around people energy and internal processing. So here's 7 tips to help. 1. Tell the group how good they are at their subject, so the introvert understands how you want them to add value and realizes the value of their contribution. 2. Introverts tend not to like random conversations, so help to structure it some more. This will help them engage with it. You might just need to give them a simple summary and ask them what they think. 3. You might line them up for this before the team meeting. Tell them why you want their help. Let them know the purpose of their contribution. Ask how they'd like you to structure their piece. Are there some relevant questions you could ask to get into the subject? Be okay with gaps in the conversations. Introverts are normally very happy with these gaps, as they tend to think things through, where extroverts are more likely to speak first and think later, so extroverts tend to not like gaps. Make them feel heard, perhaps by summarizing their points after they've made it. Don't interrupt. This is very likely to close down an introvert. Let them finish, summarize what they said, and ask an open question about it. Don't then ignore their contribution or just talk across it. That's like saying their view is pointless. Now it's time to chat to Tyler. Welcome, Tyler.
Thank you for having me, John.
Looking forward to talking about storytelling, communication around it. Just before we do that, are you an introvert or an extrovert?
I am most certainly an introvert. I have had to develop a second personality. So there's me, who everybody gets with. You and I are having a conversation. You're talking to Tyler Foley. But everybody will note that if I'm in film and television or theater or even my book, I use my full name, Sean Tyler Foley. And Sean Tyler Foley is a character developed to be an outward representation of a person that I need to portray.
I like that idea. You're an introvert at heart, but you've learned tactics to be able to interact with the world in a more extroverted way.
Yes. The funny thing about being on stage is it's actually one of the most introverted things that you can do, particularly when you're a keynote speaker or a presenter. It's just you. Although you are presenting to an audience and there may be 1,000, 10,000 people that you are talking to, the stage is actually an incredibly isolating and insular place to be. It's one of the reasons why I actually enjoy public speaking, because I control the interactions. And as an introvert, that is helpful.
I think that's really interesting because it certainly mirrors my experience of being on stage. How do stories help in communication?
Well, I think stories are how humans have communicated for hundreds, if not thousands of years. We use the power of story and allegory so that we can understand each other's points of view. And one of the most powerful things about story is nobody knows your story better than you. So you are the expert in your own life, in your own experiences. And if we speak from the heart, if we are brave enough to discuss some of the things that maybe we're afraid to say, we have the ability to have real impact. We can get someone else to see our point of view by explaining our thought process, by explaining how we see the world. And the best way to do that is through telling a compelling story. And it doesn't have to be a Hollywood blockbuster with explosions, crosses, and big plot twists. It can just be a simple story of me being on stage and feeling comfortable about it as an introvert.
Do you think stories are something that's seen as more of an extrovert thing or an introvert thing?
I think we have the perception that stories are an extrovert thing because typically if somebody is telling a story, you're going to assume that they're an extrovert because attention is on them. And I think a lot of times we confuse introvert and extrovert tendencies, the assumption being that an extrovert is going to be seeking attention, which could very well be the case. But an introvert can just as easily tell a story. I just think it depends on the setting and scenario. As an introvert, if I'm in a small group of friends or people who I feel very comfortable with, who are longtime associations, I will gladly open up and tell 1,000 stories. But if I'm in a room of strangers as an introvert, I don't feel as comfortable doing that. That said, remove me from the pressure of small talk, and my stories don't change. The story that I would say in a small, intimate group of my friends, I'm going to say to a large group. I just need the comfort of the stage to do that. And it's weird for me how that is almost a barrier. And I've had to train myself to understand that I can still do that down off the stage just as easily as I can on the stage, and to kind of lose that security blanket that the stage offers me.
If I was let's say I'm a manager or a leader and I want to help my employees to communicate more effectively, as most leaders do, how might I go about encouraging introverts to tell more stories?
One of the fastest ways to do it is to use a very simple question, and that is, what does this insert blank mean to you? So what are these figures? What is this information? What is this new direction? What is this policy? Starting to get somebody to give you their point of view and to recognize that probably 1/3 of your labor force is going to identify as being introverted, at least. Typically, that means that they're not going to be the first people to jump up and share. So finding those ways to make it more comfortable.
What kind of things can managers do to help their team feel more comfortable?
Developing a more relaxed sense of the workplace. When it's very formal and very structured, right? We're going to meet in a boardroom and we're going to discuss this thing. That's very formal. There's a stigma that it's attached to that. Where if I was to meet my team in the lounge with just the couches and we sit, think of King Arthur and the Round Table. No one sat at the head. And so when you start to sit in a more relaxed environment, that can actually lead to a little bit more camaraderie, which builds that sense of family and trust. And that's when you have a group where people feel supported. And that's the other thing too. One of the great things that I learned from being in theater was yes and. What I encourage a lot of leaders, whether they're introverts or extroverts, to do is encourage that sense of camaraderie by yes anding ideas. There is no bad ideas. There are good and great ideas. Any one idea will have a nugget that you can cling on to.
How might that yes and work in practice?
If you and I are having a discussion, right? Say we need to brainstorm a new idea or we need to come up with a solution to a problem or a challenge that we're facing. I would ask you, so what's your quick idea? And you say, we will create widgets and test them out. And I go, yes, that's a great idea because we're going to do rapid testing. And if we build on these prototypes, we can do this. And then you go, yes, and we find the nugget of the solution that has been presented. And we don't shut it down because, right, that you're not hearing a no. So now you feel supported and encouraged because I've found what I like about yours, and then I've built on it. And and when you have to actively listen to somebody so that you can find that nugget or kernel of thing that you like about that, because not every solution is going to be great, right? There's going to be some that are on paper downright terrible.
But there'll be something good in it.
And so what it does is it forces active listening. And when you force active listening, that's actually when you can unlock the power and the superpower of introverts, because most of us are going to sit back and be very analytical. And now all of a sudden I'm activated as an introvert because I can sit back and I can listen to what the good things are. And then when somebody else is struggling, I've listened to the whole piece. And so very likely I'm going to be the one as an introvert who finds that really good nugget because I was actively listening. And then that builds that camaraderie because the person who presented maybe the poor idea feels heard and validated. And now we're developing not only a kinship, but a teamwork framework that allows everybody to feel included and involved.
And I guess the really important part then is you've made everybody listen, and you've then said and rather than but.
Exactly.
Which is what of course I hear so often. Yes, but, which means I haven't listened, but here's my idea anyway. Okay. Now, one quick question that struck me while you were talking, because we've had this great discussion about communication. I love the idea of how a leader can help their team to work more together by the yes and technique. And I love the point that you made about introverts needing to feel slightly more comfortable and how a leader can do that. We also talked about stories as part of communication. In a business setting, what is a story?
The story in a business sense is no different than what a story is in any other setting. The difference is, and Les Brown says it famously, never make a point without a story, never tell a story without a point. In business, we need to know why we're telling the stories. Stories have, again, this ability to provide insight into our thinking. Particularly as leaders, a lot of times we need to make decisions that are not necessarily understood by the entire organization. So if I can give insight into that decision making, it's more likely that the labor force is going to understand it. And therefore, it's more likely that the labor force is going to get on my side and come on board. I always think of it as like television static. You have all of this white and black fluff. And our jobs as leaders is very similar to an old television when you actually had to turn a dial. We need to align everybody to be in the same area. And that's when the music is heard. That's when the picture becomes clear. Otherwise, it's just static and noise because everybody's doing their own individual thing.
So the story is about bringing everybody together. It's not just giving your decision, but the rationale behind it in a way that the audience will understand.
Yes. And usually, typically, the power of story allows people to see the world through your eyes or walk that mile in your shoes, right? Well, I can't physically do that, but metaphorically, I can if you can tell me your point of view through the power of story.
Could I get you to give me one tip for an introvert about storytelling?
You are the authority of your life. By telling your story, you don't have to worry about forgetting anything. You can just present your story knowing why you're going to do it. Back to Les Brown's point, never tell a story without a point, never make a point without a story. One of the great things about being an introvert is often you don't speak up, and people will pay attention when you do because it's an oddity. So just know why you're telling the story, and it will land very effectively.
And a tip for an extrovert?
When telling a story, some of the most effective questions that you can ask are, how do you feel about that? How does this land with you? That you can tell your story, but allow your audience to fill in the details.
I like that.
Right? You can give the main plot points, but let them create some of the fluffy paragraphs that give more and more detail into that story.
It's been great talking, Tyler. I'm sure that some of the listeners will want to get back in touch with you. What's the best way for them to do that?
SeanTylerFoley.com.
Thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
It was my pleasure, John. Thank you.
And now it's time for Introvert Myth of the Week. Those
crazy stories that I hear and you hear that some people actually believe.
Introverts and extroverts won't get along. I can't say much more than rubbish. One thought though. Although extrovert and ego are not the same, most introverts tend to dislike people with a big ego. Some people conflate ego and extrovert. That's the end of Series 1. Please join me for Series 2 next week, where there's going to be 4 episodes in the week to kick the series off with an HR focus.
I'm John Baker. Thank you for listening. I hope you found it useful. Please add a review on the iTunes Store. There's a new episode every Thursday on your podcast provider or at activateyourintroverts.co.uk. Until then, go be introversial, activating your introverts, building your business.